Chalk and cheese. Let me just clarify one thing. If you're speaking about the artist, I think it's true. It's very difficult to get at the core of an artist's intentions. The question of them living in fear, I don't know about, and then the examples you give are two scientists. That, to my mind, is very much a separate issue. I would say this. It seems to me very difficult to come up with what I think we might agree on as masterpieces of music, literature, painting, sculpture, if there isn't some higher vision, if there isn't something motivating it. I don't know of many great artists who have created great art solely out of fear.
We come back from our first break to Christopher Hitchens and David Allen White to that question. Can there be great art without faith? And if not, doesn't that make faith, well, inevitable? I'll be right back. Special couple hours on the Hugh Hewitt Show. 21 minutes after the hour, America, special 2 hours on the Hugh Hewitt Show with David Allen White, professor of English literature at the United States Naval Academy for more than 25 years, author of the Encyclopedia of Shakespeare, Horn of the Unicorn as well, and, of course, Christopher Hitchens, Vanity Fair columnist, author, most recently, of God Is Not Great. When we went to break, Christopher Hitchens, the question on the table was, without a higher vision, can there ever be great art?
No, I would say there could not. I mean, I think that there's a big confusion, though, in many people's minds between the transcendent and the supernatural. I have a special passage in my book trying to speak about this. I think if one wants to consider the awe-inspiring and the infinite and the majestic, that actually there's more to be found if you study the photographs taken by the Hubble telescope or examine the extraordinary beauty and implications of the double helix or read a page of Stephen Hawking on the event horizon, than there is in, say, the contemplation, I'm very sorry to say, of St. Dominic. And that the natural world is wonderful enough. And as Einstein says, the miraculous thing about it is that there are no miracles. That it works with an impressive, extraordinary underlying regularity. Now, Dr. White can't follow me in this, by definition, because he's obliged to believe that the Church has recorded and established divine interventions that are responses to prayerful intercessions that change the natural order in favor of those praying. For example, a belief that I'm sorry to say, but I must get out of the way, I think is utterly nonsensical and actually sinister.
David Allen White.
A number of things to comment on there. Let me start with a word of praise for the book. I find it one of the most interesting passages. I wish I could quote it at length, but in the book, Mr. Hitchens talks about, indeed, those staggering photographs taken by the Hubble telescope, talks about the glorious mystery of and the symmetry of the double helix. I wouldn't disagree that those are remarkable things, and that science, at its greatest, has allowed us to view that. Now, obviously, our response to that will be different. But I do have a question, and I would like to get to the other issue about prayer in a moment. But let me put it this way: one of the great events in modern human history was that man stepped off the planet. It was an extraordinary scientific event. It was an extraordinary human event, an engineering feat that, in its way, was incomparable. I know of only two works inspired from that event. One, Norman Mailer's Of a Fire on the Moon, which I'm very fond of, even though Mr. Mailer drives me crazy much of the time with things he says, but I think he is a fine writer and an interesting writer.
Well,
and the other is a minor poem by W.H. Auden. And I'm wondering if it will be possible that great art can indeed be inspired by these events in the same way that, for example, St. Francis, that in the book is referred to as a mammal who was said to have preached to birds, has inspired artists from Dante and Giotto back in the 14th century up until our own time, when Francis Poulenc has a beautiful setting in the 50s of the Prayers of St. Francis, and Olivier Messiaen's fascinating new opera from the early 80s, St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis is still inspiring artists. I admit there are glories to be seen in what science has shown us. I don't know if they can inspire art or would do so 600 years in the future.
Mr. Hitchens?
Well, I was just going to say that I agreed with most of that, but isn't it a somewhat depressing thought that the ability of religious faith to inspire great painting and music and architecture seems somewhat to have diminished? I mean, the examples you give are not bad, and like you, I'm also a great admirer of W.H. Auden, as well as a critic and admirer of Norman Mailer. But just as the age of miracles and of great religious writers, and people like Aquinas and Augustine, seems to be somewhere behind us, because it's not possible to hold the positions of faith with the same absolutely uncritical devotion as it used to be. I think the same is true of the aesthetic, but again, I repeat, the same claim can be made for Hinduism, for the splendid, if barbarous, temples of not Hindu, but Buddhist Cambodia, for example, or Burma, for the Grand Mosque at Damascus, and for many other things, but at least speak, to me at any rate, not at all of the truth or validity or moral standing of the faiths that inspired them.
I would agree with you very much in that there has been a diminishment in the number of these works that have appeared, but again, I would say you can't have it both ways. You are expressing a kind of a kind of gratitude. Would that be fair? That finally religious faith is diminishing.
Yes,
but one of the consequences is we are losing the art, the artist, the literature. I'm sure you know this because you refer to the book often, and I'd love to talk about it maybe sometime during the course of the discussion. One of my favorites, which is the Brothers Karamazov.
Yes.
You know the great scene where old Fyodor, the father, has two of his sons, Alyosha and Ivan or Ivan, at the table. And he says to them directly, is there a God? And Ivan says, no, there is no God. He asks Alyosha, the young monk, is there a God? Alyosha says, there is. He follows, is there immortality? Ivan says, no, no immortality. Alyosha says, yes, there is. Now, Ivan goes one step further then and takes the cognac away from his father and says, without God, there will be no cognac either. There would be no civilization at all if God had not been invented. Now, I think that's your claim. Fair enough, that God was an invention?
Yes, absolutely. It's a man-made construct. It's a reification of our fears and also of our self-centeredness.
I guess what I am suggesting, and Dostoevsky said it himself in a letter he wrote after the book was finished, that he thinks he made better arguments than the atheists themselves had made. He was an honest man and a brilliant man, and in that taking away of the cognac and saying there can be no more civilization, I think he is absolutely correct in that civilization is connected directly to the religious impulse, and that what we are likely to see is a descent into mere political power, as Waugh called it in his great novel Helena, power without grace. Maybe we can explore that later.
Christopher Hitchens, you've got a minute to the break. So are you destroying civilization by attacking God?
Oscar Wilde, who we both have to view as rather heterodox Catholic, did, I remember, once say that the religion that invented green chartreuse can never truly die. And like you, I'm a great fan of Evelyn Waugh, but I'm sorry to say that the will to power, which Nietzsche said would be, all that was left without religion, is expressed through religion as well. You don't get away from the will to power by invoking faith. It's part of the will to power and has always been used for it. And if you want instances of power without grace, there are many, many theocracies to which I can point you, sir, as you must know.
Oh, of course I know. But again, it doesn't invalidate the notion that grace exists, and power is more dangerous without grace.
We'll be right back. We'll continue the conversation. Christopher Hitchens and David Allen White. When we come back, what's going to happen to Hitchens when he dies? I'll ask White that when we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.